What's up, everybody? If you are watching this video, then you are probably a new member with us or an existing member with us. The target goal of this video is to pretty much break down the community, how everything works, what every group means, and of course, how to break down our alerts. So if you've just joined, you're probably a little overwhelmed. We added you to 4 different groups, one of them being the Hyper Chat, one of them being Hyper Wealth, one of them being Hyper Alerts, and finally your Hyper Charts and Education. So what we're going to first do is we're going to go through all these groups and pretty much explain what each of them means. The Hyper Chat is pretty much the main group. This is where everybody is active throughout the day. This is where you get to ask your questions, you get to ask for chart requests, and I'm going to update you as quick as I can usually. For an example, here I got asked a question and I responded within just a couple minutes. And so that is something that you can do. If you have chart requests, you can also ask for those. For example, I got asked some chart requests earlier this week and I sent them out. You can see that I sent out a full breakdown along with an analysis. And so you can ask me for things like that as well. What I do ask of you is when you do ask for chart requests and analyses, please let me know your time frame and what you plan to do with the stock. If you're just planning to trade it for just a couple days, my analysis is going to look completely different than what a long-term analysis will be. So please just kind of let me know what your target goal is for the stock. So that's pretty much the Hyper Chat. This is the main group where everybody is always active throughout the day. The next group we want to break down is Hyper Alerts. Hyper Alerts is going to be the most active trading group in terms of where we send our setups. We send setups in 2 different groups, but the Hyper Alerts group is where you're going to be seeing the majority of our setups going through. And here's what our setups look like. For example, let's take a look at one of our option trade setups. And if you don't have any options trading experience, we will send you a completely different video. That way you can kind of get a breakdown. But this is what our setup looks like when it comes to our option trades. First, we have what we see here is the name of the stock. Next, we have the option contract that we took on that stock. In Amazon's case, this was the 175 put expiring June 21st, 2024. Now you can, of course, choose a different contract if you like, but this is the recommended contract, and this is the exact entry that I got filled on. Keep in mind that the market is always moving, so sometimes it's difficult for you to catch the same entry that I sent, and that's why you want to kind of figure out the range that I entered in. So if we look at this contract for example, let's move forward to where we took profits the very next morning, and this was labeled a swing trade. We took profits at 209. Let's go ahead and take a look at to see what this contract is doing as of right now. So if we take a look at Amazon and we pull up that contract, we see that it is currently trading at 203. So obviously we took profits at 209 and now it's trading at 203. And so if you did not catch the 209 exit, here's what you need to look at in order for you to exit properly. That would be something called the bid and the ask. You see how here the contract has the bid side and here it has the ask side. The bid side is pretty much where all the buyers are actively betting in order to get into the contract, and the ask side is where all the sellers are constantly asking in order to sell at that price. So bidders are asking right now to pay 198 and then sellers are asking to sell for 201. You want to be somewhere in between. So if you're buying or selling, so if you see this contract go up for 155 and the bid is somewhere at 150 and the ask is somewhere at 160, you want to be somewhere in the middle. You don't want to get filled too high onto the ask if you're buying, and you don't want to get filled too close onto the bid if you are buying. So here, for example, we sold Amazon at 209. If you did not catch that exit in time, then you can just go ahead and sell at a lower point or a higher point depending on where that contract is. For this example here in this specific, you'd exit around 201 instead of the 209. Still profitable, but because the market is always moving, you may not have been able to catch that exact sell. Now, sometimes, not all the time, we won't close fully. So sometimes, for example, we'll say taking profits on half our position here. When we're opening a position, the usual position size that we go with is going to be 4 contracts. That way, it allows us to cut 2 contracts at a time depending on how we feel about the stock. So you can see that from our entire 2024 record, the majority of the time we are buying 4 contracts at a time. Now, when we do buy 1 contract at a time, we specifically let you guys know saying we're only taking 1 contract on our end, or maybe we're taking 2 contracts on our end. And so that's what a setup looks like when it comes to our hyper alerts group. Keep in mind, in this group, not only do we send option trades, but we also send trades on normal shares. Let's give you an example. So let's say we got into PCG here. We got into PCG in our hyper alerts group on April 24th. Today is May 21st. Now, usually on option trades in specific, our swing trades usually last anywhere between 2 to 3 days. But for when it comes to shares, so normal shares, non-options, these swing trades can last a few weeks at a time. We send 2 different types of share plays. This is the first one, and we're going to talk about the next one in just a little bit. But for PCG in specific, you can see that we sent it here with an entry range. So you want to try to get filled in between that range. And then we have our price targets in place. Sometimes we give a stop loss, and a lot of times we're managing our stop losses manually. I will always update you guys on all our setups at the end and at the beginning of every day, such as I did here. For example, these are the 4 setups that we entered and exited from yesterday to today. I said that we closed them, and I marked if they were profitable or not. And then I updated the remainder of the setups saying if they remained as is, or maybe we took profits on half, or maybe we took profits fully. And so that's as far as the hyper alerts group goes. The majority of the setups or the results you've probably seen on our Instagram or social media come from this group, and then they also come from hyper wealth under Q's position trade alerts. But before we jump into the hyper wealth, let's talk about the last and final chat that has to do with the main options and short-term group. In the short-term group, we also have the hyper charts and education, which is pretty straightforward. This is where we update you guys on educational pieces. We send you guys charts, we send you guys analyses, we send you guys projections. Pretty straightforward group. No one can respond in this group apart from myself. Same goes for hyper alerts. These 2 groups, only I can update them, and that way the information doesn't get lost. But if you ever have something to say, any questions or comments, you can direct it towards the hyper chat. Now let's move over to hyper wealth. So for hyper wealth, when we click on it, we see that it breaks down to about 6 different groups. One being the investor lounge. The investor lounge is where you get to ask questions or ask for updates on any of the setups that go on within hyper wealth, or anything long term that you're looking at. The simplest way to break down the difference between the hyper alerts and hyper chat group and the hyper wealth group is that one focuses on short-term trading, so day-to-day trades, maybe a week long, and then one focuses on multi-month and multi-week position trades. We'll show you guys the difference of results that you can expect to get between the 2 in just a little bit. But now let's break down this group real quick. Investor Lounge, as mentioned, the main group where you get to talk and ask questions about all the setups within this group. And then you have Q's position trade alerts. So I'm Q, of course, and these are where I send all my position trade setups. For my position trades, they look something like this. You're always going to get a chart, and then you're going to get 2 to 3 paragraphs explaining why I feel this is a good stock. Now, between hyper alerts and between hyper wealth alerts, so the normal hyper alerts and then hyper wealth, what we're doing here is for hyper alerts, we're primarily using technical analysis in order to choose our trades. So we're using short-term catalysts like news, maybe stock earnings or updates in order to take on our trades, and we use overall market momentum to choose the direction. We're not really using companies' fundamentals and numbers here. We're primarily just using the charts, which makes this group a little bit higher risk because it is trying to predict the day-to-day. For hyper wealth, we use fundamentals, which is why every trade comes with grand old explanation of why we choose this trade and why we're expecting it to go up in the coming weeks or maybe couple months. Sometimes some setups will take a long time to come around. For example, JD, we entered on February 20th. It's been about 3 months until it finally hit our price target and we took profits. But look at this. You have a much more solid return and you don't have to worry about an options expiration. With hyper alerts, we are constantly fighting time decay. For options, of course, they have an expiration date, which makes them higher risk because if that expiration date comes around and we don't exit or it doesn't come around, then that option contract may expire worthless. Now, very little does that happen. We usually do cut losses or take profits far ahead of the expiration date, but sometimes we get trapped into a trade and we don't exit in time and it turns out to be a loss. For Q's position trade alerts or any position trades under Hyper Wealth, you don't run into that. We're strictly taking shares positions and we're willing to hold them as long as it takes in order for them to come around. For Hyper Wealth, if you just joined or if you are looking to get into some setups, I try to update you guys as much as I can in terms of what position trades are open and which ones are closed. For example, I did so here. I updated the 4 positions that we took profits on, and then I sent you guys the explanation of what's happening with the rest of them. And of course, you can always refer back to the original setup that I update you guys in order to look it up, or you can just ask for it. Under Hyperwealth, you'll also see position trades from Trevor and from Dave. Both of them have their own picks. If you like them, you can follow them. If you don't, you can choose to follow other ones. Of course, we try to give you guys as much information as we can, but at the end of the day, you have to do your own due diligence and you have to like what you buy in order for you to believe in that position and continue holding it. Under Hyperwealth, we also provide you guys with an education and performance tab. Now, speaking of performance, let's go ahead and pull up our trade records. For our trade records, we're focused on the 2024, 2023, and of course the Hyper Wealth trade record. So all the positions that we took in Hyper Alerts in specific, here in this case, the options trading group, we have them listed here in our May trade record. It is May, so let's go ahead and go over this trade record so far. So of course, we have the option contract that we took. We have what kind of trade it was, the date purchase and the date sold. You can see we held this for 2 days. How many we bought, how much we bought it for, and how much we sold it for. For May, we are up about $1,300, close to $1,400 so far from our trades. You can see, however, there were some losing trades. So that tells you losing is part of the game, but as long as we are right most of the time, or as long as we control our losses, we are doing well. We're up 1,400, but that requires you to follow our setups and follow our rules. The worst thing you can do is start taking random setups because you believe in it and you don't ask for some guidance, or maybe you hold on to a setup that we sent thinking that it's going to come back around or something like that. We are professional at this. We've been doing this for nearly a decade. And so when we exit a trade, we usually have our reason for exiting that trade. If you want to know that reason, you can just ask and we can happily explain that to you. Remember, every trade we take has some kind of strategy behind it. And as soon as that strategy begins to fail, then we exit the trade and you can see we try to control our losses. But nonetheless, so far for me, we're up about $1,400. And you can clearly see that we have kept the same position size for the majority of our trades. The only times we switched it up, we actually told you guys specifically that we're taking 2 or maybe 1, but the usual size of trade is going to be 4 contracts per trade. It differs on shares, of course, but we try to keep it around that $500 level. So you can see our trade record for 2024. This is strictly for Hyper Alerts. It's so far positive for April, May, and all the months that have passed. And we'll share this with you if you'd like. Now, for Hyper Wealth, on the other hand, this is strictly for the position trades that I send. Here's what you can expect. If you are a trader who cannot pay attention to the market all day, every day, and you may not be able to enter and exit our setups within time, on the Hyper Alerts group or the options group in specific, then you may want to consider Hyper Wealth, because if you work full-time or if you're a type of trader who wants to buy something and forget about it, and you want to buy something with confidence, you want to buy something that has fundamental strength, then Hyperwealth is going to be your bread and butter. You can see that on Hyperwealth we take a lot less losses. This is since the beginning of our Hyperwealth group. We started it on April 20th, 2023. Since the beginning, you can see these are all the setups that we've taken, and so far we have made about $11,500 in over the last 13 months. The usual position size on Hyperwealth, this is our buy total. The average of it is going to be around $2,500, and we usually hold these positions anywhere between 3 to 6 months, but we're not limited to that at all. We are willing to hold longer if it takes longer to come around, because remember, we're choosing the Hyperwealth setups because they are fundamentally strong. We're usually finding undervalued companies and awaiting them to come around before we take our profits on them. Alright, so I hope this video helped you out. If you do have any more questions, of course, please direct your questions at me. I'll be more than happy to help answer your questions.